What's up, Don? I pinned this. What's my platform? Are you talking about rifle? I have a 12.7 LWRC. It works just fine. That's what I use for everything. Pin this one. I pin this. Howdy, goofy goober. Yo, what's up, bits and bins? All right. What are we up to today? Well, I was just sitting here anyways and wanted to do some research into officers who were killed during the execution of warrants. So if it was a narcotics warrant or a felony warrant for somebody's arrest, and then and they were killed, trying to look at the way that they entered or approached the scenario or situation, which I presume in all cases, essentially, I am also looking for teams, so like warrant teams, tactical teams, SWAT teams, because those are the guys that are going to be, if they are executing a warrant, at least then, not more so now, but then, we're doing a dynamic entry. So I want to look at as many incidents that I could find and then compare them to, I guess, what would be considered, or compare, just, look at the entry methods, right? I don't think that we're going to find any that were a surrounding call out, because I don't know of any where that happened. I've got a SWAT group of guys in the Signal app, and I just know this to be true in a lot of cities where SWAT teams have gone away from doing dynamic entries and are doing surrounding call outs for pretty much everything, unless it's a hostage rescue or active shooter. However, there are still groups of guys, people, organizations, maybe even, although not many, that continue to do dynamic entries for things. And I just want to look at the history of cops getting shot or killed, or I guess it would be killed, because that's the only thing you're gonna be able to find through the FBI, and the way that they entered, and just compare, that style of entry method on, safety, basically, if that makes sense. Ain't nobody got balls for that anymore. Well, I mean, it's not about having. I mean, so like, if you go look at the short that I just posted at 9, and I think it's like 90s, early 90s in Miami, and look, it's like 4 or 5 dudes hitting a door, shooting at a dog or whatever with a shotgun, and then running in through the house, right? And one of the things I posted on the Instagram yesterday or the day before was something similar. It was kind of like a skit. It was kind of just like a funny thing. But the 2 officers kind of run in, and they're just like throwing stuff everywhere, and they're like, holding people at gunpoint, like, "Where's the drugs?" or whatever. And then on the next slide or next couple slides, there's a kind of a photo, and I wrote, and it's like, it shows like narcotics officers where they're wearing like gym shorts and jeans, and I said, I think I said something like, every narcotics raid before 2012. And so I don't know. It's just kind of like can get away with doing anything when nobody is actually trying to fight you, and then when they are, we're going to talk about it, right? Because we're going to see what happens when they fight, right? I'm going to read you some of these things, and what you're probably going to see most often than not, unless the officer has a shot on the suspect, which in a lot of cases they simply don't, right? Because he's holding an angle that you're not holding. And so maybe we shoot back, maybe we throw bangers, maybe we try to do all these things, but we're not advancing down the hallway now that we know there's a threat down there, right? So then what do? Well, they get out of the house, and then they say, "Hey, it's too dangerous in there. We got to call this guy out." And then we're going to also probably see what happens when they do that, right? There's a couple different philosophies, I would say, on the topic of like dynamic entries and what they provide. And one of those things is that you're not giving the suspect an opportunity to prepare himself, right? And by that, and there's another short that I posted, 2 or 3 days ago, where these guys are doing like a narcotics interview for like a Vice thing or whatever. There's a Glock right on the table in front of them. There's a bunch of cocaine, and it's in what was the country that was in? It's in a foreign country. Someone might put it in the chat. But they raid their apartment. Banger goes off. The first, and they're not in like in the immediate room. They're in an adjoining room to like the living room. The banger goes off. The door comes open. Banger goes off, and maybe I don't know, 8 seconds later or whatever, your guy walks through the door where the guys are, where the gun is, and he just has a shield and no gun in his hands. And then the second guy walks through the door all shielded up. I don't know if he has a shield, but he has like body armor all over the place and no gun in his hands. And they're like, hey man, telling him in a different language, get on the ground, whatever, all that stuff. And I'm basic, pointing out in that it's like the guy had an opportunity to grab the gun and shoot it out with the cops. Okay. But he didn't do it. Not because he was like, oh my gosh, that's so scary. I was going to do it, but now I don't want to do it. No, he didn't do it because he wasn't going to do it anyways. And so almost 100% of the time that I know of the warrants that I know of where, narcotics officers have done a surrounding call out, and we can get into the reasons why they don't do it. I'm not saying don't do it. Like, do what you want to do, right? But what do they do, right? When SWAT does a surrounding call out for a narcotics thing, they go in there and they find the guns and drugs. Some actually a lot of the time even just out in the open still, but oftentimes like they try to hide it, right? Like try to hide it in the attic, try to hide it in a closet, right? And it's found after they give up, right? So what would have happened if they would have done that in that situation? Well, I'm sure these guys would have tried to hide their stuff, flush it down the toilet, whatever, then they would have come out, right? And I understand that there's maybe people that believe that they don't want to allow that to happen because evidence is a priority on the priority list. Look back hundreds of years at warrant service. I don't think cops in 1924 were doing any dynamic entries. It would just surround them and announce and wait it out. Well, I don't know. I don't know if we can go back to 1924. The FBI, I think, started. It's like 90s, somewhere in the 90s. So, and the way that I've been through all of like the statistics on it. You have to go by year, and it's not even all of the country too. So, a large majority of the statistics on the use of force and stuff is collected from major cities who make up, the majority of the country. In terms of like manpower, but there's still a lot of people that don't report. So, but it is what it is. It's all we have. A lot of professionals in a controlled environment. Believe that was Netherlands. It was something like that, but it wasn't. Somebody posted it in the comments there. More distance, more time, more opportunities. More distance, more time, more opportunities. Are you talking about like from the police side or the suspect side? Because, and I could go through my chat on my phone where I have, I don't know, maybe 15 SWAT cops around the country from there. And I had them write in there, when they stopped doing dynamic entries. And I asked them what's the population of their city? Because you can kind of determine like call outs, based on that. Or just like tempo, right? So, and then they said why they stopped doing it, and most of them said like they realized that it wasn't worth, risking people's lives over evidence was the main reason. Another guy said, well, because their county and DA is not prosecuting people for narcotics, so they don't see the point in, risking their lives over it. That was a factor. But he also said he wishes they would have just stopped doing it because it wasn't safe. And then all of them said that there hasn't been one related shooting since they started doing their other methods, which was like follow him away from the location, get him at another location, wait till the person leaves the residence, stop him, and then do a search warrant on the residence, right? And so if those ways of doing things were also as dangerous or more dangerous, well then we would see that, right? But dope, especially dope people, like they carry they have a lot of guns because they get ripped off by other dope people or other people that know they have dope and money. So that's pretty much what they, have them for. Well, you're talking about an active shooter, and you're not talking about a warrant, and so the mission that you're giving me is a completely different thing. So, I mean, you have to know when to go and know when to not go. So I don't want to talk about that right now because I've done a whole podcast on it and everything. So, but it's a different mission, so people know that your tactics, techniques, and procedures are dictated by the mission. So, anyways. So I'm going to start with this first one, or I started at 2019 just because I happened to be on there, but I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's long, but I'll skim through it. So it basically just says Illinois state trooper shot and killed executing a search warrant at a residence. Team members approached the home. As team members were approaching the home, the individual inside the residence began firing at them with a 9mm handgun. One round struck the trooper, who was wearing body armor and a ballistic helmet in the front of his head. The trooper was transported to a local hospital where he was pronounced deceased. Several team members returned gunfire before arresting the 45-year-old suspect, who was under the influence of alcohol and drugs. So, I imagine that they arrested him sometime later. And a lot of these things, would take some more research because of the way that the summary reads to figure out more details. And a lot of times you're still not going to figure out all the details. But things like that, like what I'm wondering is, as the team approached the home, the individual began firing. So that tells me they never made it to the home. One round struck the trooper. And when that happens, if you're taking fire from a perceived location inside of a structure, you're no longer advancing towards that structure. It's more like an officer down thing, and now we're getting behind cover. And so then it just says they returned gunfire before arresting him. So that could have been 6 hours later that he walked out, right? I mean, we don't know. So August 23rd, 2019. I'll only do this on this one because it'll take forever, but I'll look it up to see if we can get more details. And I'll do this part of it like later anyways. So what I'll do is I'll go to Google. August 23rd, 19. Illinois trooper. All right. Department of Justice has something related to it. Best, but let's see. It was a drug warrant. Okay. Doesn't have any details on what they did, but the guy was charged and all these things. Go to a news article. Okay, so one thing that I found is after the shooting, the suspect in the case held up inside the home. Okay. Hours later, right? Just like I kind of felt was the case just by reading what I saw in the summary, 3 people were taken into custody. A heavily armed SWAT vehicle moved in on the home Friday afternoon and drove through the front door. Okay, so we have already a significant problem with this idea, right? This technique, this idea about dynamic entries, right? So if dynamic entries do what people say and claim that they do, which is basically doesn't give the person time to prepare themselves, and it's a psychological thing where they submit because, loud explosions, these things happening. How could you possibly drive an armored SWAT vehicle through the front door and deploy a diversionary device, probably attached to the SWAT vehicle, move up to make entry, take gunfire? I mean, does it get more violent and, surprising? And so, what we should do, and this is something you really can't do, right? Look at these incidents, or other people can't do. Look at these incidents where officers, tactical officers in a war instance, got shot at, right? Has there ever been a conversation about what they did wrong and what they could have done to mitigate that thing from happening? I have never heard anybody have that conversation. Because, I mean, what do you change about that? Well, we shouldn't have used the truck to breach the door. We should have walked up and placed a charge on the door and then hit the door. It's like, okay, so then the guy wouldn't have had time and would have been more scared. So, what I basically talk about and get at is that the success of dynamic entries, or any entry, is completely determined on whether or not the suspect has a will to fight. And if he doesn't, then it really just doesn't matter anyways. So since I already researched this one, I'm going to add a note to it and say, just like drove armored car through door. Bang. Hours later, arrested. So the next one that I have written down in the same year says 13-year law enforcement officer, U.S. Marshal Task Force, approached a hotel room to serve a warrant. The subject was on parole and wanted on a felony warrant. Officers knocked on the door. An individual partially opened the door but left the chain attached. A moment later, another individual fired multiple rounds through the door and wall using a semi-automatic rifle, 7.62. While the officers attempted to withdraw to take cover, the subject repositioned himself at a window and fired at the deputy sheriff, striking him in the rear upper torso above his body armor. The subject fled in a vehicle somehow and led officers on a chase until he crashed. After a lengthy standoff, officers arrested and charged the suspect with murder. So there's also this idea that if you give the suspect, or you're also, by moving fast, quick, and making all these noises and doing all these things, you're reducing the suspect's ability to make a decision to fight officers too. And I would almost argue that in a lot of cases, what it seems like is you forced, a suspect who was willing to fight into making a rash decision, a quick and rash decision, versus him being able to think about things, the consequences of the things that he's going to do. And that seems to be the case when you see officers or you see suspects giving up hours later. Okay, so how do they make the situation significantly worse for themselves, shoot at cops, and then give up? Like, what's the point of giving up at that point? So that would be the second one there. And go back to the FBI page. Basically what I do is go into the summary and I search for a keyword. Warrant will be associated to people or narcotics. And a lot of them are like, so there's this one, excuse me, there's this one, the first one that I started reading, is crazy. Like this officer was off duty and he saw a suspect that he knew had a misdemeanor warrant at a nearby complex. So the officer drove his personally owned vehicle over there in plain clothes, confronted the suspect, got into a struggle, and the suspect shot him 3 times and killed him. Just saying, that's completely unnecessary. In plain clothes, not clearly identifying yourself, which I'm assuming you mean you also don't have body armor on. I think I can send it here. This is the page that I'm actually looking at. There's summaries for every single year. And so really to find what you're looking for, you have to keyword it. Or if you're not looking for anything, you can just read them. Let's see, here's another one. Okay, so Dayton Police, narcotics search warrant, drug task force. Enforcement officers knocked on the door of the residence, announced their presence, then forced open a side door and entered. Law enforcement veteran, 30 years, headed down the stairs forward or toward the basement in search of suspects. A subject hiding in the basement fired on the detective with a semi-automatic handgun. Oh, 5.7. Although the detective was wearing body armor, 2 rounds struck him in the front of his head, mortally wounding him. Assisting officers disabled the suspect with chemical pepper spray and an electronic control weapon. The wounded detective was transported to the hospital. Suspect was arrested. So there's another one, which I've made this, because so the one of the main premises is surprise. Well, is it a surprise if you're knocking on the door and saying you're the police before you rush in there? I would argue that it isn't. And so if you're knocking and announcing, which almost everybody is now, is it still a good idea to continue to enter? This one is a officer with somebody with felony warrants in a parking lot. Not interested in that. Another officer was killed while attempting to serve a search warrant. The officer, a veteran law enforcement officer with 14 years, tactical engagement unit, no knock on a suspect believed to be illegally purchasing and selling firearms. Everyone was wearing body armor and ballistic helmets and body cameras. Approached. Okay, so there might be body camera on this. Actually, I know for a fact there will be because I know the state and I know that their agency, their DA or general, I think attorney general, they have all the body cameras. So I'll probably go looking for that one. After the first door strike, an officer announced that they were the police in a search warrant. A second door strike Officer covered 2 officers while they were using a ram to break down the back door. After the first door strike, an officer announced police search warrant, and a second door strike opened the back door to the multiple occupancy building. Throughout the encounter, officers continued to loudly state that they were the police and they had a search warrant. 3 officers, which is something that I don't recommend that you do. Because if you've met the requirement for announcing yourself as the police by knocking and announcing, and you've done that, overtly, why would you put yourself inside of a CQB environment and continuously yell out your location as you're moving? It doesn't make sense. 3 officers began climbing the back stairs to the upper unit where the suspect lived. The door to the unit was locked. A 35-year-old officer used one-person ram tool to create a large opening in the door. Almost immediately, the suspect fired 4 rounds from a 7.62 semi-automatic handgun. I don't know. Maybe that's a thing. Through the door. Through the opening. 1 round entered the officer's protective vest through the armhole shoulder area and struck his shoulder upper torso area. Assisting officer stepped towards the opening, aimed his rifle into the residence, and observed the suspect with his hands in the air. Officers took the suspect into custody, while other officers carried the victim officer out of the building and into the backyard. Officers and medics tried to save the officer's life, transported him to the hospital, but obviously didn't survive. Which I would be really curious if you look at the details of that one, because that might be an instance where the suspect, well, they said they overly announced themselves a bunch, so. But a lot of times suspects use the argument that they didn't know it was the police, there are times where they don't get convicted or charges are dropped, or they don't get convicted. We'll just say that because that is a defense that they use, which is also something you can mitigate by not rushing in there. So that's all of 20. So the Lokia FBI goes all the way back to 1996. So there should be summaries all the way back to 1996, and 2020 through 23 are available, but they're not like in the same list. You have to kind of like go look. So going to 2018, searching warrant. U.S. Marshal. Whenever you see U.S. Marshal, it's going to be a warrant, but see where it's at. Execute an arrest warrant for a suspect for stalking a police officer. During the confrontation, the suspect fired 6 rounds from a semi-automatic rifle he had built himself. 2 rounds struck and killed the deputy, who had 3 years of experience, mortally wounding him above the body armor, upper torso. Assisting officers fired 26 rounds, none of which struck the suspect. The 26-year-old suspect had criminal history for resisting arrest. He was arrested for murder. The interesting one. Doesn't say where it happened at. U.S. Marshals, Phoenix, November 29th. Yeah. I want to look at this. I want to figure out where it happened at, because if it's like in a parking lot or something. U.S. Marshal serving a felony warrant killed Thursday evening outside of a house on the city's north side. The man suspected of shooting the marshal was arrested after a standoff at the house. It's kind of that thing again. Let's go do this really dangerous thing for this really dangerous person who's only a danger to himself. And then when the shooting starts, we'll just go to where maybe we should have started this whole thing to begin with, because now we know for a fact it's too dangerous, and then the guy will give up. A lot of times they shoot themselves, but sometimes they shoot it out. But let's see, against a man at the house when the suspect fired at them. It would also be nice to know, which the marshals, you never really get this information, is were they approaching the house? Were they inside the house? I'd really like to find the details on all of these things so we can get a better understanding of the tactics and what worked and what didn't work, but we almost never can. So I got that one down. Next one. Okay. So 26-year-old Grove Police patrol officer, 5 years. While attempting to gain control of a suspect, 2 deputies were at a residence attempting to execute a arrest warrant on a suspect who failed to appear. The suspect refused to comply with the request, so they asked for assistance to take him into custody. When they arrived on scene, wearing body armor, attempted to take the suspect into custody. However, he resisted and retreated into the residence. The officers followed the suspect into the residence, and the man took a blunt object and struck the deputy in his head. The suspect then took out a .45 caliber handgun and fired at all 3 officers. I mean, that's probably a case where if they went over there to arrest somebody for an arrest warrant, they probably could have, done all of the things outside the house before actually going in, but it's kind of not sure. Seems like that's what they did. I don't know. I'll write it down just because if they were there on like some call or something, or like, oh, hey, this guy has a warrant, well, then you're already there, and that's a different thing. And that's one talking about a suspicious person. Warrant. It began Lebanon Police Department serve a warrant. The 3 suspects fled in a vehicle. The suspect then ran between the buildings and encountered responding officers. Not interested in that one. 41-year-old officer, Zachary Police Department, assisting in the execution of a warrant for a wanted person. The reserve officer who was wearing body armor along with another officer who was attempting to arrest a man on a wanted warrant for second-degree battery, felon in possession of a firearm, aggravated assault with a firearm. The suspect was spotted at in a rental cargo truck. Well, I'll just read this even though it's not related because it's interesting. The officers split up and were approaching the driver and passenger sides of the truck when the suspect became aware of them and accelerated forward. So I guess, like, the officer got run over. Thought that was going to be a shooting, but it wasn't. Answering a call for service, fatally shot, not interested in that one. Listing Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, so this is probably going to be a warrant. Suspect had sold meth to an undercover agent or agents on 2 occasions and presumed to be armed. Agents attempted to breach the door of the residence where the suspect was located. The suspect opened fire from inside the building, shooting through the door and striking the investigator in the front of the lower torso, abdomen, below his body armor. Another agent was also injured. Other agents returned gunfire, justifiably killing him. So I'm going to guess that this is what happened. They approached the door, were trying to breach it like they said. He got shot through the door. He went down. They returned a bunch of gunfire through the door. Didn't know what happened to the suspect. Called SWAT, or they did it themselves. And hours later, the suspect was found dead inside. So let's see if I'm right. August 4th, Oklahoma. Comanche County Drug Task Force. Now, I will say this too. When you're talking about Drug Task Force, Comanche County, And let's see. Yeah, and was assisting the Bureau of Narcotics. A lot of these more rural agencies, they have they're not even like groups of guys that train together frequently. They're people that are on different squads or teams doing whatever it is they're doing, and then they get together and they go run a warrant because they need more manpower, which is not good. I mean, I've never seen a well trained task force made up of different agencies. It's just like not a practical thing. Warrant. Find it. Oh, and the person who was killed was a Comanche County District Attorney's Office, an investigator. So those people are just they just don't train. They're just investigators. Usually they wear a suit and they have a badge and a gun. Probably have a vest, I'd assume. Um, so maybe Comanche County investigator. Can I find this? Timothy Dell Cole Sr. Let's see if I can find more details. I want to figure out what they did. I doubt they made entry till later on. News articles are pretty good for explaining, for the most part, like the general idea of what happened. So there's more details on what happened. Um, no, that's you can read the pinned message. It's not actually pinned, I guess. It's the top message that I left in the chat. That'll tell you what I'm doing here. But I'm looking at officers that were killed during a warrant and copying down the summaries. And then later I'll go back in more detail to try and figure out more specifics on what exactly happened in terms of, analyzing CQB methods of entry, basically. Oh, that's interesting. I can't find that one for some reason. Not a lot of information on that one. Go to the next one. Fatal injury. Answering non-emergency call for service. Not interested in that one. While investigating a series of robberies. This one's related to some warrants, but it's related to vehicle stuff in a foot pursuit. Another one is a call for service, home invasion, deputy marshal. Phoenix, I already did that one. Uh, Suspect fired 6 rounds. Rifle. Wait, I already did. Or maybe I'm back at the top. Okay, so I already went through 2019 and 2018. So I'll go back by year. Go to 20. Seems to me if we look back and 100. Oh wait, I already read that. All right. In 2017, there's only 2 summaries with the word warrant in it, or actually, there's only one. Oklahoma. Shot while responding to a call for service regarding an eviction. So there's only one in 2017. Which, by the way, like those eviction calls are, I would say it's one of the common calls that lead to, shootings at least. 16 summary. All right, later. And this is a long summary. California, but let's see if I can just figure out. A search warrant was obtained, and the SWAT team was sent a robot inside the home to locate the suspect, who was believed to be hiding in the attic. Was not able to locate anyone inside the home. Deployed tear gas. Suspect, who was wearing body armor, climbed out of the bedroom window, did not comply commands, and was shot with non-lethal ammunition before being apprehended. So it doesn't mention warrant. Let's just go back to the beginning. Was killed responding to a burglary in progress. So that was California, burglary in progress. Later they got a warrant, and that's how they approached the situation, which is also like an interesting point, right? So suspect kills an officer responding to a burglary. They get a warrant for his arrest. SWAT gets the warrant. And what does SWAT do? Let me go back up. Oh, wait, hang on. Oh, okay. At the time, the suspect was arrested and charged with by shooting from a motor vehicle, including charges. Just after 1 p.m., October 8th, 2 police officers were shot and fatally wounded in ambush, entrapment, and premeditation. Third officer was shot and injured. A 63-year-old police officer dispatched to the residence, allegedly causing a disturbance. 27-year-old. I don't know why they have this written like that, but it's like separated into 4 different, or is this all of California? Oh, okay. Each one of these is a different call. Anyways, that's not an actual warrant. What's up, Baywatcher? Let's see here. Georgia, August 14th, the GBI secured a murder warrant for a suspect. Was found hiding in the trunk of his sister's car. I didn't that one. February 11th, 50-year-old Riverside police officer shot assisting on a drug-related no-knock search warrant. As the Clayton County Drug Task Force and the Clayton County Police SWAT team were executing a search warrant at an apartment in Riverdale, the major, a law enforcement veteran with 25 years of experience, observed an individual running from the apartment. He exited his patrol unit and ran diagonally to intercept the fleeing individual. When the major encountered the individual at the end of another building, the 24-year-old suspect, or 24-year-old subject, fired 4 rounds from a handgun, striking the victim major in the front below his vest. Below the waist, rear, below the waist, arms, hands, and fatally in the front, lower torso, stomach. The suspect was in possession of a 38 caliber revolver and a 45 caliber handgun. Did not determine which weapon was used to fire the fatal shot. So that's a vehicle pursuit. They were setting up for a warrant. Somebody ran, and then he got into a foot pursuit, which is also a very dangerous, task. A lot, not a lot, but it's one of the ways that officers are killed. Deputy, Howard County Sheriff's Office, tactical situation, 3 years law enforcement experience, 34-year-old corporal, 10 years law enforcement experience, reported to a residence with 4 officers to serve a search warrant and arrest warrant. The officers knocked on the door of the residence and announced themselves before entering. As they entered, the deputy and the corporal located the subject of the warrants inside a bedroom. The 2 officers tried to open the door, but were met with gunfire from a 9mm semi-automatic handgun and a .357 revolver. The suspect fired 9 times, and each officer was struck with 1 round from the handgun. The deputy was fatally struck in the front below the waist, and the corporal was hit in the rear elbow of the waist. The victim officers were wearing body armor, returned fire, but were unable to subdue the suspect because he was hiding behind a furnace. The gunfire ceased, and the suspect died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. The victim officers were taken to an area hospital where the deputy died. The corporal recovered from his injuries. So I'm just going to copy that one, although it might not be related. However, people here listening, or if you find this later and listen to it, I don't know what they did. I wasn't there. Maybe they did everything right, because you can do everything right and still lose. But that's why I make videos about setting up on doors properly, how to set up on doors. A really good example of this is if you go and watch the Cops Unbiased review of Real World CQB Tactics, I think it's called, on my channel, which is Parish, Baton Rouge, Narcotics Task Force, and they get to this door, and the door's locked, and they kick it open, and I explain in detail how you can set up on this door, breach the door, and have more guns into the fight while utilizing cover and or concealment to your advantage. And then all of the other things that come with that, which is forcing the suspect to have to react to what he actually doesn't see and figure out where you're at to engage you, which buys you a little bit more time. And the fact that he can't shoot all of you because you got a guy here, you got an officer here, and if you did like a high-low over here at the corner of this hallway, behind a shield, there's just a bunch of different better ways to do that. So, working doors is important. Why I cover it a lot. And it's something everybody can do in every tactical situation. Whether it's a warrant or you're in a house, talking to somebody behind a door, basically. Shelby Police Department, tactical situation 2 days earlier. Conducting surveillance on a resident where a subject had an outstanding warrant for robbery. Sergeant aiding with the surveillance from his patrol unit noticed a vehicle leaving the residence and attempted to follow it. Officer was still in the surveillance site. At the surveillance site, informed Sergeant over the radio that the vehicle had returned to the residence. Officers conducting a traffic stop at a nearby street heard gunshots and responded to the area. The officers discovered the unresponsive victim officer, who was wearing body armor, face down on the ground with 2 gunshot wounds to the front upper torso. The 38 caliber revolver. Both rounds entered above the victim officer's vest. One entered the right upper chest. One entered collarbone. The trajectory of the round suggested that the suspect fired shots while standing over the officer. A witness confirmed that the officer attempted to tackle the suspect, and the rounds suggested that the suspect fired shots while standing over the officer. Wait, did I say that? The officer fired, let's see. A witness confirmed officer attempted to tackle the suspect, and the suspect fired approximately 5 rounds from the revolver at the officer while the officer was on the ground. During the struggle, the officer fired 1 round from his service weapon and struck the suspect. However, the officer's service weapon malfunctioned as he attempted to fire a second round. Investigators at the scene discovered the victim officer's flashlight and a magazine from his handgun. A backpack and several belongings, items belonging to the suspect, were also found at the scene. The victim officer was transported to the hospital. The 23-year-old suspect was arrested 700 miles away in Rhode Island. Yeah, that's weird. Well, it sounds like he was on surveillance, saw the suspect return, and decided to try to arrest him himself. Does that sound right? You guys heard? Which, by the way, also, most cops are killed because they. What is commonly found in the killings of officers is the major underlying contributing factor is tactical or procedural errors. Things we're doing that we shouldn't be doing that are getting us killed. Let me grab something real quick. By the way, I can go back into my lives, and I can, or any video really, and I can cut out the portions that I don't want in there, which, like me getting up and doing all these things, I can just skip over later on. I need to go back to the other lives I did and do that, actually. All right, getting back into this here. So I just read over the summary where the officer was killed on surveillance. That's not something that I'm looking for. Ohio, 54-year-old officer, Columbus, wounded during a tactical situation that began late in the evening, April 9th, and lasted into the next day. The veteran, well, just without even reading it much forward, I'm assuming that there was a shooting. They evacuated themselves from, if it was at a house, the structure, and it lasted so long because they were doing other things surrounding it, gas, all these other stuff. But let's keep reading. 27 years law enforcement experience, SWAT team assigned to executing the arrest warrant for a man who was wanted in an aggravated arson. The individual was suspected of starting a fire inside of the home of his estranged wife. The SWAT team entered and arrived at the residence and approached the front door. One of them knocked on the door, but did not receive an answer. Officers confirmed that the vehicle at the rear of the residence belonged to the subject and verified he was inside the residence. Officers with the negotiation team attempted to communicate with the man over the loudspeaker. They advised him he was under arrest and needed to come out. He refused to leave the residence. 2 SWAT team members entered the basement in an attempt to turn off the power to the house. The man heard the officers beneath him and started shooting through the floor at them. One of the officers later realized that one of those rounds traveled through his vest, narrowly missing his neck. A SWAT officer then drove an armored vehicle to the rear of the residence and, oh yeah, I remember this one. To the rear of the residence, he parked the vehicle and stood wearing body armor in the open hatch behind the turret with his rifle pointed towards the residence. 9mm handgun. April 10th, the suspect fired a 9mm handgun out of his back bedroom window in the direction of the armored vehicle. One of the rounds struck the victim officer above his left eye as he stood in the vehicle's open hatch. Officers removed the victim officer from the armored vehicle, and he was taken to a local hospital. A short time later, the house started burning. After a standoff, which lasted several hours, members of the SWAT team arrested the suspect. The victim officer died at the hospital. So, I'm not going to speak to like the shutting off the power thing and entering the residence. But I mean, I will say that the reason that they want to shut off the power mainly is to like make him uncomfortable. I don't know what I guess this was when was this? In April in Ohio. Well, April in Ohio, it's not warm. So that's where I'm from. So I know that much. So April in Ohio, they're shutting off the power. I guess like cold could be a factor maybe, but I don't know. What time is this at? I'm thinking like shut off the power because they want to make it dark. Doesn't say what time it was, but that's kind of the reasons for shutting off the power, like AC, comfort, heat, making it dark, creating an environment that's more advantageous for yourself as the officer, operator, SWAT guy, whatever. And then it says shutting off the power, and maybe the water isn't down there, but the water would be something they want to shut off too, because suspects can use the water to, kind of hide or get away from gas. So they usually try to hide, get away from gas, or use it to kind of cleanse themselves of exposure, kind of. So, oh, okay, but this is really important, okay? And this really irritates me, and I don't really understand this, and maybe somebody could just explain it to me because maybe I just have it wrong. And I've been corrected on this wrongly myself, I feel like, which is we're surrounding a structure. I am behind an armored vehicle that I can see through, right? There is a marksman who is up in the turret and presumably behind his gun or in a position to both see and shoot if he needed to. Why would I need to be in a position where I'm exposed behind when I can already see behind the armored vehicle when I can see? Why would I need to stand in a position where I'm exposed looking at something where I just see a house? I see nothing. I see curtains. I see blinds. And I've seen guys where they're standing like in a ready position, and I'm not talking about like the suspects coming out or hey, there's something here I need to maybe address it. I'm talking about, a surround and call out situation where you have an armored vehicle and you can see, right? Because there's a window or you're standing in a position where you can see. In my case, it was an armored truck, not an armored like Bearcat or something like that. Why would I stand exposed to something I have no control over, them shooting at me or even returning fire, right? I've been on a scene and a part of a situation where a sniper was in a a position looking at the two-story window where he was taking gunfire from, and he was not shooting back because he could not see anything, right? He has a lot of discipline, very experienced guy. So how in what ways does it make sense to stand exposed? Give me a second, let my dog out. Answer, or you have a different opinion, then let me know what it is. Because more than likely, what's going to happen when you're standing in an open position or a relatively open position, holding on something, and you start taking that initial gunfire, well, one, you're probably not going to see where it's coming from. And what do you do instinctually when you can't see where the gunfire is coming from? I think everybody knows the answer to that. But you get behind cover. And maybe, and actually, the events that I've been involved in, every time there was shooting going on, people did not know where it was coming from, right? And all those are opportunities to get shot. For those, by the way, I'm on YouTube live, but I started Instagram live at the same time. Maybe I should do that more often. But for the people on Instagram that maybe don't have an idea of what I'm doing here, I'm starting to go over all the officers that were killed during warrants, um, going back as far as I can. I started at 2019. I'm on 2017 now. And if the summary involves officers making entry or not really, as long as it's related to a warrant, then I'm copying the summary down and adding it to a file, like a note thing. And then I'll go back and I'll try to get more details later on the topic if it doesn't provide enough information. For example, one that you guys missed because I started this later or earlier, that I did kind of do a little bit of research because sometimes I try to guess because you can kind of tell based off the summary if you have enough, you've been exposed to enough of it, you kind of know how these things work, which is like basically if they're inside a structure, you're approaching a structure and you take gunfire, well, what always happens usually? If we don't see the suspect and we don't hit the suspect, then we're egressing out of there and setting a perimeter. So there was the first one that I did, a trooper was shot approaching a residence to execute a search warrant. And it just says the individual inside started firing from a 9mm handgun. One round struck the trooper who was wearing body armor and a ballistic helmet. Struck him in the head, front, I guess, below the helmet. And then it just says officers returned fire before arresting the suspect. So, okay, well, if you know how these things kind of work and you can read that situation, you could basically determine, which is what I said here earlier, which was, okay, if they were approaching the residence and they took gunfire and they returned gunfire before arresting him, more likely what happened is they returned gunfire where they thought he was or whatever, whether they saw him or not, I'm not sure. But then when they arrested him, that probably happened hours later. And it turned out that that's what happened, right? Because that's what happens. But, kind of the reason that I'm doing this, eventually I'm going to, put something together and talk about dynamic entries, and safest approaches, right, to situations. But this is what they did in that situation. They drove an armored vehicle through the front door and deployed what people say was there was a loud bang after they drove through the door. So my guess is they had a diversionary device attached to the armored vehicle, and they drove it through the front door and then began approaching the house to make entry, and the suspect started shooting. So, can you ask for more, surprise, violence of action, and making all these things happen to gain a tactical advantage? And one of the things we started talking about earlier on was, speed, surprise, violence of action, and when do you actually have that? When do you lose it? Should you keep going at that point? If it's taking you 5 hits to get the door open and you still don't have it open, are we still going? Because that's what we're doing, right, normally. These all are just questions like anybody can ask themselves. However, one of the things I also mentioned was that I have a SWAT group of guys, and I've asked them, what's your, narcotic search warrants? Are you guys, or even arrest warrants, are you doing dynamic entries, or what are you doing? And most of them said, or all of them said no. This is from around the country, and I'm saying, okay, well, can you tell me your population, when you stopped doing them, why you stopped doing them, and what you're doing now, and have you had any shootings since then? And the answer was kind of what most people would probably expect, which was we stopped doing them because we realized that they were too dangerous, and it wasn't worth getting officers shot over unless it's hostage rescue. And their population I asked for because I wanted to get an idea of their tempo in the city that they worked, and the reason why they stopped doing them. And what they're doing now is surrounding call-outs. If it's a drug thing, they try to get the person away from the house, stop them on traffic, or arrest them, and then focus on the house. And none of them, and this is going back to, I think one guy said they started in 2016, 2018, and none of them, the guys that I'm talking to, have been involved. There has been a shooting related to doing it this way. So it's just a thing. It's just information. You can do what you want with it. I know there's a lot of emotion attached to these. So I read that arson. I want to copy this one down because people might go, was this arson one that I read? This kind of was a surrounding call out. And so actually, they did make entry because they were doing some tactical thing. But and so people might use that and go, "Oh, see? Surrounding call outs are dangerous." And my caveat to at least this one is you should be standing behind cover. I know we can't always do that. We have to move from place to place. But I think that's an important thing because I just see a lot of cops doing that, setting up with their, especially cops that don't have an armored vehicle. You know, you're already at a disadvantage. So now we're going to set up on top of the hood of our car or around our car looking at a house that we can't see. I would rather put as much of the vehicle between me and that thing, you know, still remain like an aggressive posture, be ready to respond if somebody comes out with a rifle or somebody starts shooting and I start ducking. Okay, where is it coming from? Oh, it's coming from there. Now let me get out and get some rounds over there. Oh, and one of the instances I remember, like, thinking about this is I saw, you know, team guy and he was at the end of the Bearcat, you know, with the door open, you know, partially exposed, using it as a barricade, looking up at a 2-story window that was, you know, had a blinds over it and the sun was out. So you couldn't even see into the window even if the blinds were up because of the reflection. I'm just like, what do you do in that situation? I just prefer to look at through the armored glass at the window, you know? All right. So this is attempting to arrest a suspect for a violation of a warrant, resisted arrest. Hands, show his hands. That's going to be related to a structure. 45-year-old officer, El Paso, injury sustained, unprovoked attack. Not going to be something I'm interested in. So I'm done with 2016. I'm going to go back to, or go to 2015. And one of the things that I've been talking about on Instagram is like, I think I posted this on the story where I said, and this is kind of like a reason for doing this too. You know, if you look at the evolution of CQB in policing, well, I mean, let's just admit that most cops that are running warrants are not proficient in CQB. Okay, and that's pretty obvious by watching them run warrants. And the most proficient guys are the SWAT guys, of course, because they have the time, the resources, and all that stuff to do it. But if I had to put a time frame on when do you think that officers that CQB that we all know actually became a trained concept and idea that was implemented and respected as the way of doing it? I don't really have a good answer for that, but just for the sake of not hurting people's feelings that have maybe been doing it longer, I said 2012. And so, you know, I just want to go through all of the warrants that were executed and the officers that were killed, because we can't really determine that off of injuries. It's not going to be able to find it, and determine or just look at the tactics involved in those and compare them from 1996, I think this goes back to, you know, to 2012, and then compare the same amount of, or not same amount, but same style of warrants in a shorter period of time or whatever, and see if there's some major difference in officers that were being killed. Meaning, is it safer now executing the CQB tactics the way that is commonly taught and known, or is it about the same? And then kind of have more questions from them. Suspicious person. Warrant check, not related to a house. Man in the neighbor house threatening resident. Caller said that he may be armed, might have warrants. Officers arrived, made contact, and produced a handgun, shot the officer who was wearing armor multiple times in the upper body. Officer fired 11 rounds, none which struck the suspect, but the suspect disarmed him. Suspect then shot the officer with the officer's weapon. Interesting body camera find. The farther we go back, the further away body camera. Nebraska, fatally wounded during a tactical situation. Situation began when officers assigned to the OPD fugitive unit approached a subject near the subject's residence and attempted to take him into custody for an outstanding warrant. Approached the subject near his residence. The subject fired a handgun at the officers. No rounds hit the officer, and the suspect fled on foot. After this initial incident, officer, 7 years experience, reported to the scene with other officers to assist the fugitive. When responding officers encountered the suspect in a driveway, the suspect fired a weapon at them. One of the assisting officers returned fire as the suspect jumped over a fence and entered a neighbor's backyard. From the backyard, the suspect again fired his handgun, and one round struck the 29-year-old officer wearing body armor in the right lower neck. Assisting officers returned fire and struck the suspect as he attempted to flee on foot again. Pursued him on foot a short distance, located him on the ground where he had been justifiably killed from the other officers. Warrant, a house or a structure, but a whole nother set of problems, so I'm not that one. Now we're on 2014. Alaska, state trooper, fatally wounded, attempting to arrest. Veteran law enforcement, more than 5 years of experience. Arrived at the residence to serve a arrest warrant for a man charged with an assault and driving on a revoked license. When the pair contacted the man outside of the residence, he refused to cooperate and attempted to access the front door to go inside. As they tried to take him into custody, a struggle ensued, causing the front door to open and all three men to fall onto the living room floor of the residence. The trooper removed his CED. So basically, it's talking about, it's a warrant, but kind of a hot pursuit or fresh pursuit following him in the residence, which is something that I actually advocate against when we talk about hot pursuit or fresh pursuit. And I've been involved in situations where an officer was involved in a vehicle pursuit. Oh, the suspect's bailing out on foot, and I'm going there to where the officer was for his backup, and I get there, and the officer's car is in the street, and I don't see the officer, and I think maybe I hear scuffling on the radio, and I'm looking around, and I see a door open on a house, front door, so I'm like, okay, well, maybe they're in there, so I run over there, got my gun out, and I can hear the commotion, and lady sitting on the living room couch, older lady, because I'm like, where are they? And she said, like, they're back there or something. So I knew I was in the right place, and I ended up going back there and end up, like, kind of fighting this guy, suspect, with this other officer inside this bathroom. And so there are legal reasons, exceptions to entering residences without a warrant. And a hot pursuit or a fresh pursuit is one of those things. But I don't advise people to do that because you're placing yourself inside of a CQB environment by yourself in an environment you don't know, you're not familiar with, you don't know who else is in there. Complicating it for other officers who probably, if you are in a hot pursuit or fresh pursuit, don't actually know exactly where you are because you are in that situation. That means you're like basically right on the guy or you're looking at him. Not, and like the door hasn't even closed yet kind of situation. So it's all bad. So I think it's important to know what you can do from a legal perspective, but why you probably shouldn't do that. And I would also, this is more like from a patrol perspective. If you're a trained narcotics guy and you're set up on a house and you hear the destruction of evidence and you want to, you want to use that or whatever, use that as some reason for entering a house, which is a known reason for doing that, and another exception to the search warrant, destruction of evidence. That's your choice to make. I would advocate against any street officer to do something like that for the tactical reasons that I explained. But also, I know of instances where officers did that and it turned out not to be what they thought it was. And although they met the legal requirement based on the facts and circumstances that they knew at the time, they got hemmed up for it. And not even legally, but like department wise. So it's just not worth it, you know? And I would say, just more than anything, from a safety perspective, with, again, the only thing I am an advocate for on an exigent entry is the preservation of life, right? So you get to the door, you hear someone saying, help me, or there's blood everywhere, or whatever, right? All these other things that would warrant you to assume more risk and take on more risk because the mission says that you should. What's up, Capone? Thanks for stopping by. So, anyways, I read that one about the Alaska Trooper, and it turned out there was some information in there, which, by the way, I think we could just read these and talk about that. That should be something that I do, but I'm looking for something specific right now because I've read a couple where there's like, oh, this is good information that people should know from a tactical perspective, but it's not related to what I'm looking for. Conducting investigative activity. Both detectives were veterans. The detectives were dressed in plain clothes, were searching for a subject with a felony warrant. Suspect was wanted for probation violation, aggravated assault. Detectives and a third detective in a separate vehicle were checking locations the suspect known to frequent. At the suspect's mother's residence, detectives observed a vehicle matching the description of a vehicle known to the suspect to be used. The suspect was inside the vehicle, appeared to notice the presence of detectives. He began driving evasively. Upon leaving the complex, the suspect accelerated rapidly, collided with another vehicle in an intersection. Detectives arrived, exiting. Suspect emerged from the bushes, fired numerous rounds. Fatally shot in front of his torso. That sounds like an ambush. Not what I'm looking for, but SWAT related. Pomona Police Department? Where is this? California, right? Wounded during a tactical situation in San Gabriel. The officer was part of a SWAT team. Why does it say wounded and not killed? Some could have been probably wounded, maybe then killed. He died later. A lot of times in these officers that were killed, not a lot of times, but it does happen where you'll see an officer that died. It'll say like 2018, 2019, whatever, something somewhat current, but then the narrative will read something that happened years ago, 1995 or 2002, but it's posted in the 2018, 2019 section because that's when they died, but the event actually, they succumbed to their wounds basically like years. So, serving a warrant for an investigation involving a motorcycle gang. Give me 1 second. Be right back. So, all right. Officer was part of a SWAT team serving a warrant for an investigation involving a motorcycle gang. SWAT team prepared to breach the front entrance of a residence. The officer, a veteran officer with 16 years of experience, pierced the screen door to pull it open. At the same time, a man inside the residence opened the interior wooden door which swung back into the living area. Another man stationed himself behind the man who opened the door and fired a single shot from a 12-gauge pump shotgun toward the officer. The shot passed through the arm of the man who opened the door and hit the officer in the neck and throat, above his body armor. The victim officer immediately fell to the ground. SWAT team members entered the residence. As SWAT personnel detained subjects inside and secured visible weapons, SWAT medic at the scene gave the victim officer medical aid, transported to the hospital for treatment. So the man that was arrested had no prior criminal record. He had prior criminal record, including violent crime, drug, all that stuff. Weapons, had previously been convicted. So I'm going to save that one because that's a warrant and it involves them making an approach and being shot. That's kind of crazy though. The officer, they were at the door. I guess he was like going to puncture the screen door to unlock it maybe. And then the interior door opened by a person, and the suspect standing behind this person shot at the officers, but in doing so shot through the person who was standing in front of him, his arm, and then hit the officer. So it sounds like, but they were making some type of entry, going to make an entry. And then, this is, again, I'm not going to look into it now because it's going to take me further away from getting more of the. But if I do look into this one of the things that you might find, because it says the victim officer immediately fell to the ground. SWAT team members entered the residence. It doesn't say, and they don't say this, they don't go in that detail in these, but this could have happened hours later. SWAT team members could have entered hours later. But one of the reasons why they would enter immediately is if they felt like they had a tactical advantage from where they were, because maybe the suspect was surrendering. The door was open, they could see, and they're like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought it was whatever." And then there's no reason to back up at that point. Or it says he fell to the ground, so I'm also wondering if the officer fell inside when he got shot. So that would be another reason why you would at least push initially. So, but I'll look into that later. All right, another one, 38-year-old police officer, Kylene Police Department. I think this is Texas. Wait, yeah, it is. Were shot during tactical situation. So I think I'm familiar with this one. I think there's a lot of body camera on it. Detective and the police officer were members of the SWAT team that was executing a no-knock search warrant for potential narcotics at an apartment. Okay, this isn't the one I thought it was. It says at an apartment. As the team began entry attempts, they announced police search warrant, or part of the team covered an officer using a one-man battering ram at the front door. Another part of the team stationed themselves at the bedroom window of the apartment near the front door. After 3 failed attempts to the breach of the front door, which was barricaded with furniture inside, the team decided to move the back door. As the team began to reposition themselves, a man inside the bedroom fired 9 shots towards the officer at the front door through the window with a 9mm handgun. All right, so I brought this question up much earlier in me discussing this, and one of these things that should be discussed, and like we talk about speed surprise, okay? So, I mean, speed is everybody. When you have those words together, speed, surprise, and violence of action, everybody implies that the speed is fast, okay, or it's at least not taking time at individual problems, right? Continuing at least continuous momentum forward, whether it's that's a subjective or objective conversation on what is fast, how fast should it actually be. But when everybody knows when you utilize speed, surprise, and violence of action, we're going, right? And this is just one of those inevitable variables that happens when you're running a warrant. I mean, I've seen a guy hit a door like 17 times. So, I haven't put this video out. It'll probably be Sunday's video on the YouTube. It's like the death of dynamic entries. It's so you don't have to be or something like that. But one of the videos that I go over there is Vegas Metro, who by all accounts utilized speed, surprise, violence of action. They banged the room the guy was in, which was the living room, and they were hitting the door that attached to the living room where the guy was laying on the couch, and the suspect still shot the shield guy and shot the initial officer entering. And so by all accounts, I mean, could you ask for a better situation where you feel like this is going to give you a tactical advantage? Because I don't think anybody would agree it would be more probable that he would submit if he was in the back bedroom, right? And so there was a timing issue at the window. Basically, the window started porting while they were announcing. And so that led the guys at the door to start breaching, maybe delayed, unless that was their plan. Well, you can breach the window while we're announcing. And then it took them, 5 hits to get through the door. The banger goes off right before the last hit that actually opens the door. So, by all accounts, if anybody's in that room, we should be able to have a tactical advantage over this guy utilizing that style, that technique, right? And so I think like it's a really good question to ask anybody that advocates for this style of entry in situations where that isn't a hostage rescue. Right? And it's just a question. And the question is, let me ask you, at what point, or are there points where you lose the tactical advantage, meaning there is a much higher likelihood that now we will be shot at because we have lost these fundamental elements that are supposed to provide us safety? And I'd like to hear people's response to that. And I'd like to hear in detail what their response to that. Because my question would be, okay, so if we go to breach a door because we're going to utilize speed, surprise, and violence of action, and we're on, I don't know if it says how many hits. Just says they began attempts. So let's just say they're I would say like at least 10 hits in before they're like, hey, we're not getting through this door. We need to transition to a secondary entry point, which the team decided to move to the back door. So we don't even have a team at the back door. We're going to take the time to try and breach this door, make all this noise, and actually not really do anything. And then we're going to transition the team from here around the apartment to this door and breach. Very simple, honest question. Do we still have the tactical advantage of speed, surprise, and violence of action? And if we don't, should we still be continuing to try to do this? And I do also believe that you can lose that momentum. You can kind of lose that tactical advantage, and you can also gain it back. And so there is that. But moving to the back door, hitting the door, and then going, I don't know. My opinion is that you've lost anything that you thought you had, and maybe we should consider something else at this point. And so the man started shooting, 9 shots towards the officer. So, and so like for people also that advocate for it when it's not hostage rescue, yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question. Like, because these are inevitable variables, and you'll hear them while I read some of these things. that happen that, in my opinion, force you into a disadvantage. Shot and killed participating in a tactical situation. U.S. Marshal was part of the U.S. Marshal Task Force, so I know this is going to be a warrant. The sergeant and other task force members plan to serve a felony arrest warrant on an individual who was wanted for sexual assault of a child. At approximately 1 p.m., the officers arrived at the individual's residence, identified themselves as law enforcement, and ordered him to open the front door. He refused to comply, so one of the officers broke a window next to the door. Officers yelled to the individual through the broken window and advised him they had a felony warrant for his arrest. While remaining concealed, the individual spoke with the sergeant through the broken window. The sergeant was on the porch, adjacent to the front door, as he communicated with the individual. During the conversation, the individual fired a shot from a .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun and struck the sergeant, who was wearing body armor, in the front of the head. The sergeant immediately fell to the ground, and as other officers on scene returned fire. The victim sergeant was transported to the hospital, where he succumbed to his wounds. At the scene, a standoff between the suspect and the remaining officers ensued. After several hours of negotiation, the individual exited the residence and surrendered without further incident. So that's a warrant where they weren't making entry, they were making contact, they made contact with him, they were trying to get him to surrender. He was not complying, and officer was not in a position of domination, or behind cover, or utilizing a shield. And the thing about that situation, so my argument to that, because people might go, well, see, like, that didn't work. Well, that's not a surround and call out for a wanted person. That's putting ourselves at a tactical disadvantage. Unless we're talking to him from behind a shield, from a position of domination and relative cover, what are we going to do? And so, here's the way that you have to think about these things. You, they, whoever, have to already have asked yourself the question, before you even do the thing, what if this happens, what are we going to do? Like, you should already have an answer to that. And so if the answer is, okay, well, we're going to knock on the door, and if we see him or hear him and he refuses to come out, what are you going to do? If the answer is, well, we can't go in there because of the warrant and it's a barricade, so we'll have to back away and call SWAT, well, then just start in the safer location to begin with. And, I think most people would also disagree or agree that even more so, that if he already knows that we're there and he's hiding and he's communicating, I'm not coming out, go after yourself. Now, if we make entry after him, well, it's just not a good tactical situation. You're still you're again at a disadvantage. And so what happens is what usually happens. A couple different things usually happen. They kill a cop, right? Which people argue, I'm not, by utilizing speed, surprise, and violence of action, we're reducing their ability to prepare themselves for an engagement to hurt us. But when they do hurt us or kill us, and we do a surround and call out, a lot of the times they just give up. So why would you shoot a cop, kill a cop, make the situation worse for yourself, have more time to think about it, and actually have nothing to lose, and then give up? So, because if that mentality was true, that, philosophy or that way of thinking was true, then these dudes would just be arming themselves more to shoot it out with the police. That happens very occasionally, but a lot of the times they either give up, or more often of the time they give up, or they shoot themselves. Let me read this real quick. I think decision making in the moment is a thing. Like we may start executing it in one way, but because we lost it, we would have transitioned to something different. Contingency planning is also a thing. Yeah, I mean that's true. Especially for the team guys, they do that. But I don't know. Has anybody thought about that or talked about that? Because I haven't heard that conversation. Like, hey, if we can't get through the door, I mean, let's just talk about this tactical situation, and then just okay. We have a warrant planned. We have 8 guys. We have 1 battering ram. We have 1 shield. We're going to use it at the front door or the door that we're going to make entry into, that we think we're going to make entry into. And if we attempt to make it through the door, we don't make it in, we're going to transition to the rear door with the same guys and now make entry minutes later, or try to make entry minutes later. Is that a good plan? I don't know. I would say no, because you're not gaining the things that people say that you're supposed to be gaining from utilizing that. So, and I've never heard anybody really plan, well, if we can't get through the front door, then we're just going to back out. I've never heard that. But maybe that is the better thing. Midland County Police Department participating in tactical situation. No, I'm going to copy this one, though. This is the same one I just read. And in my SWAT group of guys, one of the individuals in that group said that they do dynamic entries for these types of warrants because of losing hard drives or something like that to convict people. So that is what it is. And but also what he said was, as a team, they have decided that utilizing that technique was a decision made by the team in sacrificing their own safety for the collection of evidence in order to convict people for hurting children. Which I can get behind that a little bit, well, definitely a lot more than some drugs that may or may not be there. Always wondered if the special surprise violence guys ever, or speed surprise, I can't really read today. I'm actually kind of sick, but ever worked in a garage apartment where furniture and garbage is everywhere. Most warrants we did were in apartments with horrible environment. Yeah, I know. It's literally every house, almost, like just the way it is. And you can find videos of that. I've done it before where I've found videos of that, just trash everywhere, stuff all over the place, and like speed surprise violence event. There was a video that I kind of covered on one of the Instagrams where a guy had shot at the police. He ran on foot from the vehicle. He was in the area. They were searching for him. They got some information that he may be in this house. And, they knocked on the door. A lady came to the door. And when she came to the door, he started shooting, past her or out the house, because he was actually in this lady's house. A couple of the cops did some really awesome stuff. Like, one cop jumped in a line of fire and pulled her out, and they were shooting like in through the doorway. Another cop was indiscriminately shooting through the blinds of the living room, which is not a good idea because this is some random person's house. I mean, we don't know if her daughter or some other people are there sitting on the couch, or he's holding them hostage. Like, what are we doing? Like, you should have made that decision that you're not going to do that before it even happens, because I can't see, okay? A different situation if you're in a combat zone, probably. A lot less people to have to talk to about what you did, which, blinds in a combat zone is not something I'm familiar with, really. But anyways, suspect ends up fleeing the house, and they at one point are searching like a shed, basically. And the shed there's a narrow path that one person can fit on, where there's trash on all sides. Not trash, actually. Like, it's a shed, so stuff that's normally in a shed. And this officer has a rifle, and he's walking down, and presumably he's looking. And then as soon as he kind of clears most of the garbage into the corner, this suspect, who is within the things inside the shed is like has his gun up like this, and as soon as he sees the cop, he fires. And I think he shoots the cop twice. I think one of the rounds hits the light, cop's light. Another round hits maybe his rifle or something, and I think they all return fire, egress out of there, shoot where the suspect is, and I think they end up killing him. But where is the speed, surprise, and violence of action there? And so, what is the answer to that? Well, there's a bunch of different things you can do that don't require you to put a person into an environment that they can't reasonably cover by themselves. You could send a canine in there. You could fly a drone in there. You could drop a robot in there. But absent of all those things that take a little bit more time and coordination, take a shield in there with you. So that as soon as he sees the shield, he's shooting at the shield. And that gives you time to go, oh, he's right there. Now let me present my firearm and shoot this person. So that's why I talk about the realities of CQB, because most of the stuff that you see online, which again is a necessary thing to do. You have to train these things. You have to train in a environment that is conducive for training, and then you can add some variable things later on, but you wouldn't train people in like the room I'm in, for example. Like if you enter my house at a speed and you go left, you're going to look like a complete idiot because you're going to trip over a bunch of cords, a bunch of wires. You're going to pull down a light and probably fall and crash into this table right here. So that's the reality of like structures where there's stuff. So, CQB, speed, surprise, violence of action, and dynamic entries is all necessary because you might have to do it. But when you do it, you're assuming more risk because the realities of it are you're trying to complete an impossible task. So moving on, 2015. This one is somebody with a warrant that was walking. And also not a lot, but it's not uncommon to see cops that are killed with their own weapon. Shot and killed with his service weapon. Investigating 4 years of law enforcement dispatch to an address call for a woman reporting a man in her house that was threatening the residents there. Which, by the way, this is like there's 100 calls like this in a major city a day. The caliber said the man caller said the man may be armed. Which, by the way, I think I have COVID because my wife has it. But I think COVID does something to your brain, messes it up, makes it foggy. Caller said the man may be armed and possibly had outstanding warrants for his arrest. The officer arrived on the scene, made contact with the man inside the residence. The man produced a .40 caliber handgun, shot the officer who was wearing body armor multiple times in the upper body. The officer fired 11 rounds. I already read this one and didn't strike the suspect. But why did I? Someone asked a question. Do you work in the USA with eye tracks? And is the quiet eye topic a relevant topic where you work in context topic? I don't know what that is, so you have to explain it to me. So I think my answer to you is no. But I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to. So if you clarify your question, I might have a better response. So we did 2015. 2014. Alaska troopers again, fatally wounded, arresting somebody. I've already. Searching for a felony warrant. Suspect was wanted. So weird I'm running into the same summaries I've already read. But I already know. I went over possible. I don't know. I definitely haven't looked at 2014 today, but a lot of these summaries I'm reading are. Okay, very odd. Out of 2014. Going to summaries. Veteran officer, 14, empty servant arrest warrant, 6 house. One. Quiet Eye is a study with police officers and SWAT guys. Study is about the way of looking at the threat and for how long each individual look section high threat scenario. Are you talking about the study like eye movement and track like the officer's eyes? Is that what you're talking about? Somebody asked me what's up or where was TBIS? I don't know what that means. TBIS. Oh. You just said I think it's International Criminal Database. I put a link in the chat of what I'm looking at. That's 2019, so you have to go back to the other ones. So if you want to look at what I'm looking at, you can go there. It's the FBI. Okay, so that's what you're talking about. And do you work in USA? I track relevant topic to where you work in the CQB context. So, I mean, to me, that gets rarely like the eye movement and where you're looking gets very sciencey. It's not a word, but and I don't really like to get that far into that. And one way to just simply boil that down without knowing anything about our eyes and what our eyes are looking at or are focusing on is just simple basic times to react. Like the time it takes to see something, make a decision, react to it, or see something, react to it, make a decision. Those are interchangeable. And then actually execute the mechanical process, which would be firing our gun, right? Is somewhere between like 0.25 to 0.35 seconds on the average, which means the average person does that, which means if you put 100 people in an environment where you're testing this, regardless of their experiences and their training, their reaction time would be on average that. Would there be some people that were below average? Yes. Would there be some people that were above average? Yes. But that's what I implement in a lot of the videos that I make on YouTube because that is an aspect, that's one of the human factors that most people don't consider when talking about these things or making videos or whatever. And a good example of that would be the videos that I've made. And actually, I go over this in detail if it's like the debunking CQB, Special Forces CQB or whatever, with the rifle under the arm and passing by thresholds while you're moving directly towards a threat. Like, we're really just saying this is something you can do, but that's it. So, in a very simple test to prove that on average, you could not only not have time to make a decision at all before you're passing the threshold, because you have to see it, determine what it is, and make a decision. But even more than that, at variable distances on various targets inside of a room that aren't a paper target just sitting there, like everybody trains to, could you actually be accountable for your marksmanship even if you did shoot? And the answer is going to be unequivocally no. That can be proven. So if there's anybody that thinks that they can do it, very simple test to which you are blind to, because, I mean, if you are testing it yourself and you're setting up your own videos, surely you can make it look like you can do it. And how would you do that? Okay, well, so in that video, I gave individual people the information that they could do this in their own house and get a good understanding without really any equipment, right? As long as you have a rifle or if you want to use a handgun. But determining what that speed is for which you can cross the threshold and accurately engage a target. You can do that by setting up a target that you know is a threat in different locations, walking past the threshold, doing a ready up drill, and engaging that target. And if you're just, proficient at that, in shooting and tactics a little bit, then, or even anybody who isn't, within an hour, you can be, you're going to develop a speed for at which you can do that. Okay? But what you don't want to do is get into the mindset and the belief that you're going to be able to maintain that same speed and same ability to make a decision in a more reality-based setting. And how can you prove that to yourself? Right? Okay, well, we have an environment in which we have established a baseline speed for which I can walk across the threshold and engage a target I know. I know where it is. I know what it looks like. I know I need to engage it. Now, all you have to do is get somebody else to place that same target inside of a room in a location you're not familiar with. And immediately, you're going to recognize that the speed at which you were doing that, if you still want to hit that target, make a decision to hit that target, is going to have to be slower. Because now you're not just looking where you know the target is and making the decision to shoot the target because you know that's already in the works, right? It is that you're going to be actually scanning and looking for the target. And then, okay, now I see the target. It's actually in this spot that I don't know where it is. And a better way to do that is not use some giant paper target, cut out a person-sized target and place it in different places in the room, right? So, and you will find that you could still do it, right? It's probably slower than what you thought, but you're still able to get relatively rounds to the target when identifying it. Sometimes you're not, okay? Then you have that same person who's working with you make that target a shoot, no shoot target and a target that you don't know. Because sure, I mean, if we have a warrant for a person, we know what they look like, and we are looking for a body, but we don't know exactly like what color shirt they have on, where are they standing, right? So if you can get a bunch of different targets that look different, that are people holding things that may or may not be a gun, you will then find out how actually impractical it is for you to both see where they are, crouch down behind a dresser, partially available, make a decision as you're moving by that what they're holding is a weapon that you need to engage, and then also be accurate, like if you're being just honest with yourself. So, talking about the eyes and things, they teach, well, and even not so much anymore, but a lot of things you hear a lot of the time is like, the hands can hurt you, make sure you're looking at the hands. Well, the team that I was on at the time had like 7 blue on blue incidents in a year, like shooting each other with simunition rounds. And I'm not talking about new guys. I'm talking about experienced guys shooting each other. Team leaders. Okay? And I believe that the reason, one of the main reasons for that, and this is something I brought up when they asked, why do you guys think this is happening? I said, well, I think that there's too much emphasis on being fast and not enough emphasis on being right. And I mean, to me, that sounds pretty obvious. Like, because the culture says that we need to be fast. Like, beep, as fast as we can. I'm not saying you don't need to be. But that's always the emphasis, whether, on the range, right? So on the range, it's like fast. And then you go into, a training environment where you're shooting simunition at people, and now you're supposed to go slower. You're supposed to actually well, hang on, let me see. Let me make sure that's not one of us. And so, my opinion is that we're too much emphasis on speed, not enough emphasis on being right in that type of environment, which is causing blue on blue incidents, because you always want to be as fast as possible, and you do want to be fast, but you don't want to be wrong either. Someone said you can simply practice at home with a mock-up airsoft rifle and some paper plates tacked to the wall. Yep. Use pretty much anything. Someone said, yeah, this topic goes really nerdy. It helped me in terms of I know which area could be a threat and make decisions making more efficient. Realize that late decision making is making a big difference. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would say late decision making is like a good thing. I mean, I definitely wouldn't say that. I don't think that's what you meant, but the point is when it comes to gunfire and shooting at actual threats in law enforcement, the factor that is not typically calculated into the equation during training is how does this training that we're doing closely replicate a real life situation? Because my opinion is that the closer that you get to replicating real life, the better the training is, and the more information you can gather. But in terms of, what are you actually capable of doing from a human, just like a basic human performance perspective? It's important. Not really talked about in training per se. So let's see. So an officer was 14 years of experience, attempting to serve a arrest warrant for an assault at the suspect's house. Suspect assaulted his mother, causing severe injury. Defender was primary suspect of several ongoing criminal investigations. On September 12th, 9:30, law enforcement officials were alerted that the suspect was at the residence. Due to the increasing concerns about the individual's mental health, a tactical team was called upon to serve the arrest warrant. The team arrived at the suspect's residence at approximately 11:30 and announced their presence for 2 hours. The individual refused to come to the door. Around 1:40 a.m., the officer was assigned to use a pike pole to break out the bedroom window and remove the curtain blocking the view into the bedroom. As officer was breaking the window, the individual fired one round from a .223 bolt-action rifle from the bedroom doorway. The round from the bedroom doorway? The round entered above the victim's officer's body armor, piercing his neck and throat, traveled. The officer was transported. The suspect refused to surrender and remaining team members refused to surrender to remaining team members. The Iowa State Patrol Tactical Team arrived on scene at approximately 5 a.m. The 32-year-old suspect surrendered without further incident at 5:30. When officers entered the residence after the surrender, they discovered a large amount of ammunition prepared at the bottom of the stairwell. The suspect had prior criminal history record. Again, we don't know what happened. We don't know if, they approached this window and were attempting to break and rake the window and clear the blinds while utilizing a shield. I doubt it, because this is 20, in which, by the way, I know somebody who has gotten shot, their shield has gotten shot while breaching a window, which if he didn't have one, he'd just be dead, probably. Well, not maybe hit his chest, but you get what I mean. And like just breaching in general, there's an inherent risk involved that we're assuming risk because now is the time to breach. And, there is a tactical way to do that, but ultimately to stand in front of the door, or to breach the door, you have to stand in front of it. And so for that very moment or moments, just a dangerous thing. So if it's time to breach the door and we're breaching the door and an officer gets shot, I'm never going to be like, there is another way to breach the door or another way to, something that has to happen. So someone said, meant the process of decision making more real world elements, and we always want faster. Let's see. Yeah, look, I don't want people to get confused. You always be pushing yourself for speed and accuracy without push yourself for speed without sacrificing accuracy. But I think the conversation and I'm not involved in the conversation. I'm just putting it out there. I don't want to be involved in the conversations because people are way too emotional about it. And instead of finding answers, they just want to be right. And so when you look at like, why do we train? Okay. What is the whole purpose of training? I mean, the purpose of training is so that you develop, good habits so that you actually do the thing that you're training in real life. Say muscle memory. But when we're training, like in the training environment, we should be setting realistic expectations. And, expectation or, things that we can expect to accomplish in real life. We should be, so well versed at these things that, in training, we should be getting predictable outcomes. Meaning, when I do this thing, I am expecting this to happen. Okay. So, my stance on training is you should be careful to do anything ever in training that doesn't translate into real life. Okay. So, one of the things that I pointed out many times, and most cops shoot a lot because they have an emotional reaction, right? They're emotional gunfire. They're pointing the gun and pulling the trigger until the thing that they want to see happens. So we're not even really talking about just shooting fast, okay? We're just talking about them doing that thing. But people should be aware, like I pointed out, that when you shoot a person, as Jared Reston says, meat moves when you shoot it. When you shoot at a person, that person may not be there after the first round. And I pointed out 0.25 seconds, maybe 0.3 seconds to 0.4 seconds. Person standing, person on the ground after the first round. So that's not they're here and you have 0.4 seconds to hit them 4 more times while they're here. No, they're here and you have that much time to hit them in that same location before they hit the ground. And the problem with that and split times and things like that, this is all dependent on proximity to the suspect, target difficulty, target availability. So these are all considerations, is that if you shoot fast, you just say like 0.15 splits at a person, if that first round connects by, we'll just say 0.15, the chest that you were aiming at that was here is now here, okay? So, I mean, and that's not always true, right? There's a video that I was gonna post on the Instagram where an officer shot at a guy who had a knife, I think it was coming at him. And the officer fired like four or five rounds, like somewhat quickly at, maybe 10 yards, 7 yards. And the suspect did not go down right away. The suspect went down like started going down the second or third shot. And, people go, oh, see, people never go down after the first round. And then the officer literally tells those arriving officers, I shot him in the stomach. So maybe I think he actually intended to shoot him in the stomach because he told them that's what he did. I think he made a conscious decision, like, I don't really want to try to kill this guy. I want to just like stop him from advancing towards me, so I'm going to shoot him in the stomach. It's whatever. But, what if that first round guy's chest, right? And I would even venture to say in a lot of instances, which by the way, I mean, cops miss a lot of the time, even accurate cops that are presumably accurate or good shooters miss, because you don't have enough time to get off the trigger and stop shooting at that spot that's no longer there because it's not there. Just the times don't add up between the time, how fast you're pulling the trigger, and how fast you can see something, make a decision, and react to it. Just doesn't add up. So I would even, and I have a demonstration in one of my classes where I basically demonstrate that depending on where no, I'm not a Ukrainian, never claimed to be. I basically set up a situation and demonstrate that for you to hit this target multiple times, it actually depends on where you hit them. So basically, if they shoot at this target and start at the chest, all of their rounds are not going to hit this person because he's going to fall. And then I set the same target up and I say, okay, now shoot him in the belly button, right? And stomach area, and shoot him the same amount of times. Well, guess what happens? Well, just you can imagine this. If I start shooting a target in the stomach and I maintain that same aiming point, well, the rest of his body is moving through that same aiming point as I'm shooting. So yeah, I'm going to hit him all those 3-4 times, right? Because you have the time to hit the area in which is still available to you. But the problem with that way of thinking is you just don't know. Don't know what's going to happen. And you should be shooting people, if it's available to you, chest. That's the A zone. That's what we train. Something there. Talk about decision making. So I'm not an advocate for this. Oh, let me get my slow trigger pull. Let me have a nice grip, and let me nice trigger squeeze. Oh, bang! It took me 15 seconds to fire one round. Ridiculous. I'm an advocate for pushing yourself for speed without sacrificing accuracy. I'm an advocate for being absolutely like dominating out of the holster and putting one round on target. Like that should be something you do all the time. Like that should be your number one probably thing that you train, because that's life or death. You should be practicing all the ready up positions. You should be practicing malfunctions. Opinion on Project Gecko. Seems there are many same stuff you guys share in a good way. Yeah, I like his stuff a lot. The only thing, honestly, I've seen like one thing that I was like, I think there's a better way to do it. That I didn't quite understand. And then the other thing that they do, for whatever reason, I don't understand. I'm very careful, or maybe I even haven't done this at all. Like taking like really hard vocal decisions on stances, just on things related to the tactics, because what happens is people do this because maybe they have all these years of experience, or maybe they have this or they have that. And then when you provide information that contradicts the way that they think, they have no other choice other than to say it's wrong. And not like from an educational perspective, like, okay, here's all the stats and the data, and this is what actually happens, and this is why this is incorrect. And actually, let me show you. Let me set up a scenario and show you why this entryway is better. They don't do that, because doing that would not turn out in their favor. So I think that you should always be willing to, I don't want to say change your mind, but find the best way of doing something. Like, it's really not that hard. So, here's a good example. It's like, probably going to make a video on this, but let's just take like 3 entry methods to enter a room, and the door is closed. Okay? There's schools of thought that if we're utilizing speed, surprise, and violence of action, we're literally like following the door into the room, which means the first guy's going right, second guy's going left, and at this point, nobody has saw the center of the room, or even initially once the corners are seen, 10, like 3 feet off those corners and towards the middle of the room. Then there's other schools of thought where you open the door and you go in, right, left, right. Then there's the other school of thought, and let's say for whatever reason you can't scan the door all the way across. Or maybe you can, right? So there's other train of thought where it's like, okay, door comes open, let me, either fast, slow, whatever, scan across the doorway. We'll just say fast for this since we're going into the room in the other cases. So we open the door, and then we quickly scan across the door, right? And now at this point, we're set up cross coverage, and we're both looking in. There's those 3 schools of thought. Or let's say, for example, it's an L-shaped like balcony or something, or hallway, to where you can't scan all the way across. You can only open the door. So there's schools of thought again where people say, just get in there fast and hit your pods, or follow the door into the room, or step center before you actually step forward into the room.
Let me finish this thought and then I'll answer your question. So, right, there's people that they wholeheartedly believe in whatever one of those, maybe a couple, right? Just at face value. So the problem with comparatively telling people why this way is better than these other ways, with a person in the room, training wise, ready to engage, is that if they set that up and do that, what it's going to show, let's say they are for riding the door into the room, or they're for opening the door and just going left and right without ever seeing the majority of the room. Well, the problem with that is when you comparatively show people with a person with a blank gun or Sims gun inside, is in the other two methods. Like, you're getting shot at the door as the door is coming open, you're getting shot as you're coming through the door, and you're taking longer to get to the target, okay? Which is something that I cannot get behind. In a tactical situation where you have you are presented with a lethal threat, the question is, how long or how fast can you get accurate rounds on target? Okay? That's it. Nothing else matters, okay? So if somebody who wholeheartedly believed in these other things and thought the other stuff was trash, demonstrated that, you would literally have to tell people and demonstrate to people that our guys got shot entering the room 4 or 5 times, and then when they were able to turn their guns that way, or the third guy was able to come into the room, they were then able to address the guy. When if you step center, you can check pretty much all of the room from there, which means door comes open, step center. Obviously, that's faster to engage that target anywhere within that room than it is to do either of the other things. And then we could talk about getting shot or whatever. I mean, you're still shot outside the door, but obviously I don't think that that's worse than being inside the room. But the point is we still got to the target faster. So that's where I gravitate towards. So, but like in my high risk vehicle encounters class with what I teach on the vehicle stuff, I tell people this is the fastest way to get to the target in this situation. If somebody develops a faster way, that's what I will teach, because that's what's important. The one thing I don't understand that they do is like the snapping of the gun thing. So like they'll be like searching, and then when they see, not even when they see a threat, but when they see something that might be a threat, or they see something that they might want to look at, they like punch the gun up and they come back. I'm just not an advocate for that. Like, you should be as close to marksmanship as possible in those situations. The video of the cops' unbiased review of real world CQB when the officers are inside the house and the officer's at not a low ready, like at his feet. He's like what most people would say where you need to be able to see their hands, to be able to engage. And door comes open, suspect beats him to the first round. Officer gets shot. We don't see what happens after that, who shot the suspect. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to figure out a way where I can demonstrate this. It's just hard from like a video perspective, because you can't see the perspective of people's eyes, which is what you need to see. But what you can do is, get somebody you live with, make sure your weapon is clear, and take your bolt out. I'll just tell you, take your bolt out. You guys want to get weird, because we're not pulling the trigger anyways, right? We're just doing a basic, I would say drill, but we're demonstration, right? So put a person with a gun or anything in their hands, something, and say it's a gun, okay? If you don't have like a Nerf gun, or you don't have a replica gun or whatever, and say, hey, go stand in the room over there, and I'm gonna pretend like the door came open, and I'm gonna hold my gun up and see where you have to stand and where I have to be looking to not actually see your hands or see where the gun is at that time. Like, you could tell them, you can keep the gun in any position. You can keep it down to your side. You could keep it like pointed at me, whatever. And I would be shocked if at any time you're like, oh, I had no idea. I couldn't see. Like, you should have both eyes open and you should be seeing everything inside the room. And I've done this before, and I'm like, this is crazy, because I've had my son like, okay, move over here, move over here. Okay, stand right here and hold it up like right here. And it's like, what are the odds of that? You know? And even if you didn't see, you would make the adjustment to see what you need to see. So that's another thing that's kind of just something that's been talked about a lot. You shouldn't be searching through your sights. You shouldn't be looking through your optic when you're just walking around, you know, but if the door's about to come open, like I'm right there. Okay? I don't have my gun down. I'm like, I want to see with my eyes into this room so that I can come up on target if I see something. Because if the guy's like this, with the gun pointed at you already, I mean, you don't have time for that. You know, oh, well, I can get, or do a ready up drill in 0.7 seconds or whatever it is. Like, you don't have time for that. You know? So, you know, risk versus reward. If you can't do it, don't do it. If you're not comfortable doing it, don't do it. You know, and if you read my disclaimer in my videos, or it tells you to go to my disclaimer in my videos, or it says, to read the disclaimer, go to the channel description, where it basically says, you know, it's your responsibility to, or all officers or all people should abide by their own policies, procedures, the city codes, the state laws, and nothing that I talk about is absent of you actually training it. And that's there for a reason. So that somebody doesn't hear something I say. Well, they can, I guess, but hear something I say or watch a video that I make and then go do it and F it up and then claim like, he taught me this. He said I could do this. So it's not, I mean, that's just crazy, you know? Now, there are things that you could, as an officer, hear me say or talk about and go, yeah, I'm not going to do that next time. Very easy. These are decisions. These are maybe pre-planned things, etc. You said, is it a pre-recorded video? But I don't know which video you're talking about. I have a lot of videos on my YouTube. Go on there. CQB. I think there's a training playlist. That's where most of that stuff would be. So if you go there, separated from the war combat stuff. That makes sense. You said. Well, here's another thing that I've been thinking about. And I always like speak to cops, speak to, you know, people that I mean, people that make decisions aren't listening. But if you could, right? Like, I have a whole like probably 20, at least 30-minute video I can make on how you solve the problem with marksmanship. Not I was you say marksmanship. I'll just say cops shooting a lot and missing because if you look at it, they're shooting with emotion most of the time. And that cannot quite literally be fixed by paying for officers to go shoot, for paying for officers to go, you know, compete, for paying for officers to buy the equipment necessary, for allocating the time available to officers to go shoot. So I don't think it's a bad idea. I think if you want to do it and you can do it, you should do it. And I think it would be beneficial. All I'm saying is it's not an answer to those problems. It's not an answer to solve that problem because it cannot be done efficiently. So we can argue, talk about how to solve the problem, but it seems a little bit, you know, asinine to just literally, quite honestly, you know, advocate for something that will never happen. I mean, and maybe there's a goal. Like I said, the goal might be like, hey, just to encourage an officer, just to encourage this. But there's a way to do it that doesn't require all that. So, yeah, it's like if most officers are not getting to their sites under stress, and we also should know, that when we get people to their sites, they should be making decisions with gunfire that make sense based on what they're seeing in their sights. That means that if I shoot one time and I hit the guy, and I'm actually looking, you know, my optic is superimposed on the target, bang, he goes down, I cannot miss him where he used to be. Because if I did, I'm shooting when my sight is not on him, if that makes sense. So, if you can get officers to make decisions with gunfire based on what they're seeing in their sights, because they're actually looking at their sights under stress, you will reduce the amount of rounds that they shoot, because it makes sense. I can't promise that they'll hit them, but if you have an officer that shoots at least 25, or we'll just say 22 rounds at a suspect who's running 15 to 35 yards away, at the end of the string of fire, suspect goes down, we reload, we shoot some more. I put that officer on the range, gave him a bladed target, and pulled the target or made the target move from the 15 to 35. I said, hey, shoot as many rounds as you can. Try and hit this difficult target while it's running. And, you don't get any credit for, you don't get docked points for having rounds still in your gun. You only get points if you actually hit. So, if you miss, that's minus points, but you only have to fire as many rounds as you think that you could actually hit. How many rounds do you think any reasonable person is going to fire at a target that looks like that? And the answer is like 5 maybe, or 6, not 22 in 6 seconds. So that's it. That's the goal. Get them to do that. They will shoot less. Because you're not going to shoot like that. Eli from Gecko is teaching setting the gun is low because people sights and lesser information. But it depends on the situation. Get your point there. Doesn't. Well, my question is, and this has been true in my experience, and I've had people talk to me, like say this to me, like when they see a video about me making entry into a room, like they say, oh, like you're looking through your sights when you go into a room. I'm getting into a shooting when I go into that room and looking at the only place where somebody can hurt me. I'm not searching, and go look at any well-trained, pick your, organization person that is entering a room with their gun in their shoulder, and find me one guy that's not looking through their optic ready to engage. And so that's the mentality when the door is coming open. Okay? That's the same. It's the same thing. Yeah. But you should really look at it. I think that is something that is talked about, and there's 2 things. You should not be walking through a place searching through your sights, because it does limit your perspective, generally speaking, when you're trying to find a specific area to focus on. Okay? But like I said, just go put somebody in a room, and you'll realize how frustrated you are to try and get them in a position where they would have to be for you to not be able to see their hands. Which, by the way, I didn't really make this point earlier, but you should be looking for the entire body of a person, and then you should be looking for their hands. That's what they basically teach now at like a higher level of things. Because every time you put a cop inside a active shooter scenario and they hear gunfire and they run down and they see a person with a gun, like a target, they just shoot them, right? And what they do to prove a point that you shouldn't just look at people's hands is that person's wearing a badge on their hip, or around their neck, or a freaking police uniform, and they shoot them still, because you should look at the whole body first, collapse down to their hands. But yeah, I think that's one of those things that's just been said over so long a period of time that people just they just run with it. So if people aren't going to say, because there isn't a trained person that I know that would say, yeah, you should enter a room to hit your corner and be looking over your sights. I mean, just go find the videos of that. I don't know if there are any. But you should not be walking around. You can't even do it walking around searching, because it's just too kind of difficult, taxing. Now, for me, like, let's say I'm pieing something. I'm looking through I'm seeing the entire room. There isn't a thing that I'm missing. I'm looking through my optic, and I go, like, I do up and down, because I'm not just looking for a target, paper target standing in the corner that I can clearly see. I'm looking for, like, somebody under a bed, somebody kind of hanging out from my dresser. So my gun is following my eyes. I'm going up and down. I responded. Um, well, no, it's not really a hot topic, but people, I don't think it's. When are we doing it? That's the question. Because people go, oh, look it through your optic, during CQB. No, you shouldn't. But when I'm standing here looking at a door that's ready to come open and I'm in a position of domination, I'm just as close to marksmanship as I could possibly be. Maybe I am slightly looking over my optic, but it's not in a low ready position. Let me see. Right. So this would be the question, right? For people that want to advocate against it. Also, how do you look over your sights if you have a GBRS mount? Just saying I'm against it. All right. Well, I guess on Instagram, my phone's about to die. So I'm about to get off soon, but I'm not getting off right now. I'm going to show you guys a few things. I'm going to share my screen and adjust some things on my screen on YouTube. So if you guys want to follow or continue this, just go over to YouTube real quick. I'm not going to be long. I'm going to show you guys some special guys making entry and being behind their optic when they're doing that. Faster and most important are there false shootings. Well, even if there's false shootings, I mean, there was an article. Officer, I read this. It was a dynamic thing. They made entry. Suspect came out of the back room as the officer made it up the stairs, I think, with a shield, and the suspect emerged out of the back room, nothing in his hands. An officer shot him. So that's in a whole nother conversation, and you can look at actually, why it happened. And I mean, we know cops don't look at their sights. Okay, we know that. So it's not like cops are getting into shootings. And let me show you. So it's not like cops are getting into shootings. More often than not, shooting without looking through their sights and missing a lot, more than they actually hit, 15 to 35%. But then when they shoot somebody they shouldn't shoot, it's because they were looking through their sights. That don't make any sense. It just, and then we're going off of, well, let's look and see if there's body camera. Prove it is or it isn't that. But you got to understand that, an officer shooting a no-shoot or shooting or whatever is, you're asking for the officer to kind of give you honesty, and a lot of times they just can't. But I got to end it on the Instagram because I'm going to finish up on YouTube real quick. I'll be done. Thanks for hanging out on All right, so let me do this real quick. Let me share my screen. because this is it's kind of. All right, something like that. So let's talk about this, okay? Like, no, you should not be walking around searching, looking through your sights, because when you're looking through your sights, your perspective is here and a little bit out of your peripheral. So obviously, that makes no sense because I might see something over there where I have to snap to that and now move over that way. So let's see what happens when Navy SEALs or Berets make entry into a room. I need to buy premium. All right. I don't know if you guys can hear this, but hearing it isn't important. So he's going to make entry. As soon as he makes entry, his optic is within at least eye level. And as soon as he makes that turn, like his gun is not in a low ready or slightly down. It's up. Okay. And as soon as he kind of checked his corner, you'll see him transition his eyes, which is what you should do, your head and your eyes, to start looking for other threats. Right? Now he's not looking through his optic because that immediate threat is clear, which makes sense. And his gun is still up, which is fine because he's looking where the threats could be. He doesn't need to be looking through his optic at the places he's already cleared. And so if you come in and boom, it's there. Okay, I don't see anything there, and then you immediately start moving your head and your neck because you can move that faster than you can, turn your gun. Then you drive your gun towards your eyes. Trying to get the other guy that came. Okay, it's coming up. So let's see what the other guy does. Okay, he is not quite clear of the threshold. He's about to be clear. So he can't get behind his gun because his gun is not in the room yet. But as soon as he takes a step forward or he clears the threshold, where is his gun? Where is his eyes? He's ready to engage. Yeah, I know, Maurice. That's what I was saying. Like, okay, so how do you look over your optic in a Hydra with Hydra mount? But okay, that's one video. I mean, if anybody knows of any other videos of guys that are highly trained, knows where I can find it, and I can play. Doing some try to look, but sometimes I've used videos that says Army Special Operations. Flying in a helicopter. That'd be legit. Also says Polish, so this is like probably. How about this guy? How about this guy? Hard to see. He's far away from you. He's not as far away from me, but where's his gun? Where's his eyes? Isn't really helpful. See if we find something here that we can use. Here's a good example. But this is a people go, well, that's not a U.S. Special Forces. That's a Polish special operator. Whatever. But look at his eyes. Look at his rifle. Did he move his gun at all to engage the target? As he continued to move just slightly, did he bring his gun back down because he didn't see a target? No. You does not really help. I'm assuming this is U.S. Special Forces because they're shooting a live fire. The other guys are not. This guy checked center, shot that target, I probably imagine. Now he's checking left. Where's his gun? So, who else do we have? I wonder if this video will be helpful at all. This is supposed to be special operations team. I know what you mean and understand it. In training, there are just so many people here in Europe who literally took thought their sights in the time. Yeah. Like there's a time and a place for it where it makes sense and it doesn't. A lot of these videos are gonna cut. We're not gonna really see enough there. I'd like to try to find one more. Well, everybody loves these guys, so let's see what they do. And I know that they're probably prior spec ops, but it's gonna be hard because we're just. Here's a question: is it more likely that you, by being closer to marksmanship and being able to deliver the round, right? Which means we're eliminating the ready up drill, which can take a period of time, whatever that is. Right? Seeing it, reacting, making a decision, bringing the gun up, all that. Is it more likely that, you know, we will see a guy or we'll be presented with a threat who's ready to shoot us and be late to or later to shooting him because we're doing that? Or is it more likely that because we are closer to marksmanship, we'll be later because we didn't actually see what was in the guy's hands? I guess that's the question that needs to be. So let's see. Why does it go black right there? That not a threat. If I don't know if this guy's a threat or not. He holding something in his hands, but I can't tell what it is. It doesn't sound like he engages. It goes black. Screen goes black. And if that was the case, if we're not coming up like, which by the way, I mean, you look at when he clears the threshold, he's committed to bringing the gun up to his. Well, it's hard for you to have it kind of cut off. By the time he is absolutely at the first available opportunity to clear the threshold, his gun is coming up, and he's pointing his gun at this person who may or may not be a threat. He's not looking above his optic right here. So I think we kind of talked about that enough. But anyways, people hear I say they like to talk about, kind of say things that aren't accurate when I claims about things. People will say, "Oh, he's an advocate for looking through your sites as you're doing CQB." No, I'm not. There's a time and a place when you should be doing it, when you should be as close to marksmanship as possible, and I don't believe that the things that they tell you about are more of a factor than they should be considered more than being later to actually engaging. Thanks, David. It would be cool subject matter. Experts could travel the country teaching operating procedure. I was blessed in 2016. I think because men are always going to have their own opinion, that they're going to kind of think that is what is do what they think is best or what they want to do. The privilege these SOF guys have over LEO patrol is that they are more likely to engage only threats. For patrol, maybe there are kids, women screaming with something threat may. Yeah, but even in a active shooter scenario, in training, when I've made entry when people are screaming or there's potentially victims inside the room and I don't see the suspect from the threshold, that's still how I'm going into the room. And I will either shoot or not shoot based on whether or not that thing is a threat. And officers point their guns at people all the time who are unarmed or don't have weapons or don't actually need their guns pointed at them because of the facts and circumstances at the time that exist. But that doesn't mean that you're shooting people for targets. That's why information process is really changing. Yeah, I mean, it is. And it's, I mean, quite honestly, and I guess maybe this started more so back in 2016 timeframe because you look at the incidents that cops were involved in that were high profile incidents that didn't end well. And you look at them deeply and go, yeah, well, this could have been avoided. So there's a definite change, in law enforcement in the way that they do things. It's proving that things that they're doing are safer, but they're not as cool, Knowing that you're going to set up on every house and do a surrounding call out and somebody's going to fly a drone in and make sure it's clear before you actually go in, it just is not as fun. It takes longer. It's all these things you don't really want to do. But it's just a matter of principle, a matter of fact, which is also important to continuously advocate for. You still have to do the fast, cool, fun stuff because you might have to actually do that in real life and be able to do it. Just there's a time and a place, and when the mission supports it. Very simple. Yeah, non-threats depending on the rules of engagement. Remember, civilians run the DoD single unit out for high profile. With my screen black on. But anyways, I was literally just doing this research, and I was like sitting here, and I'm like, I'm gonna just go live. That's all that this. Probably not even do what I was going to do anyways, but have you guys, some of you guys here while I was doing it. I'm going to hop off. Probably have a video coming this week. Not feeling great. Therefore, I didn't make anything new, but I have something that's ready. So there's things to do. But anyways, I appreciate the interaction. See you guys around.